Hey everyone, it's Erin with Counter Read. I am joined by Brandon Vogel. We are here following Nebraska's loss to Colorado to hopefully shine some light on what we just watched to as much of the ability that we can, but also to hopefully spark some conversation with you in the comments and beyond. So before we get going, Brandon, I'd ask how you are. But knowing that there's severe weather heading your way, Nebraska just lost. I guess how are things?
Um, Pretty good. I was a little bit surprised by the the way the Colorado game unfolded. Like I went into that game really thinking Nebraska would win. And through the first 20 minutes of game time, you can check my Twitter feed and see like at the point that Nebraska got the ball back with about 4 minutes left, I tweeted, I was like, it's 0-0. This has gone about as well as I think it possibly could for Nebraska. Um, this is a big drive coming up. That was the second fumbled snap exchange, led to the first Colorado points. All of a sudden, you're down 13-0 at halftime, and everything flipped with that play. And with this Colorado team, which we knew going in based on 1 week, there's a lot that I didn't feel we knew about Colorado after 1 week. But what we did know is they have extreme, like electric playmakers. They can put up points in a hurry. Really, to that point, I thought Nebraska's defense had about pitched a no hitter, but you had that fumble, and then you had an interception that also led to points, and the snowball started rolling downhill, and that was kind of it.
Yeah, the big thing for me, I was sharing the game comparison notes before, like I shared them at halftime. I shared them um, the at the conclusion of the game, and some of the things that really stood out to me is the fact that heading into halftime, Nebraska had the ball about 6 minutes more than Colorado to that point. So even though Nebraska was down, there was some reason to believe that with some adjustments, whether it was maybe potentially needing to swap out Jeff Sims for another quarterback, or maybe Jeff Sims settled in a little bit differently, whatever the case was, it was Nebraska was still at least holding onto the ball long enough where the defense wasn't going to get overly tired and fatigued. There was still some room to figure things out, keep Colorado off the field. So there was these like little like glimmering moments of hope where you look at that. In the end, though, Nebraska actually ended up having the ball about almost a minute, no, 40 seconds less time overall than Colorado. So Colorado came back quite a bit. And as a result, we saw that affect the defense. The defense started to get more and more fatigued. I actually tweeted that while the defense looked like it was getting tired, it was still fighting very hard. And I think one thing there's certainly no moral victories here, but I think if you wanted to take something positive from this, what Tony White has done with this defense so far is really, really good. I think that there's a lot of hope to be had, especially as he can hopefully add playmakers and more talent to that room in the future, especially with what he's doing right now. But the defense absolutely is the reason that you look at the score and you go, well, Colorado won 36-14, but that defense was going to break down in that second half just from fatigue. It like I said, it went from Nebraska controlling time of possession to coming out on the losing end of that as well. That defense was getting beat up in the second half more than it was in the first half. And so you can take a pretty, honestly, the biggest win for me in that case, when you think of the defense, is I was like, I wonder what that would have looked like a year ago. But again, there's no moral victories. The issue that we run into here is that I just simply don't think Nebraska has enough playmakers on its offense. So you can sit here and go, the offensive line looks a little bit better than it did in 2022. You can start to the running backs look a little bit better than they did in 2022. But when you start to realize you don't have Trey Palmer in the wide receiver room, and you don't really have somebody who is a Trey Palmer, so it becomes more and more difficult for a quarterback who is already clearly broken in their confidence, is struggling with turnovers. There isn't that weapon out in front of them, at least not consistently enough. And so I think we're seeing where, like I said this before we started recording, but one of the things that Rule really probably needed to do more in the offseason was build that receiver room through the portal. But he is the type of coach that wants to, he's not a fast build kind of person. He wants to see what he has and, evaluate it and build it and yada, yada. But unfortunately, because of that, I just think you have a really bad combination right now on the offense where if Casey Thompson had stayed, Casey Thompson is still not going to have Trey Palmer on the other side of the ball, like on the other, like excuse me, not on the other side of the ball, but out there for him to throw to. Like he would still be looking for that person. And I'm not saying that I think unfortunately the situation that we're looking at right now is you can point to things where you go, yep, that looks better, but it's not consistent enough. And there's some really glaring holes. And those are the areas that opposing teams are going to take advantage of going forward for Nebraska.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think to be 2 games into the season, you based on what I've seen through 2 games, you've got to kind of confront the unfortunate reality that this Nebraska team is limited in some very specific ways. And I agree with you on both sides of the ball. They lack an athleticism that, if you want to go there, you can say Colorado added in one season, which, just to say, almost everybody was skeptical of all off season. But they did it, and it has shown up in their first 2 games. Colorado has Colorado State next. They're going to win that game big. And then they get Oregon and USC in back-to-back weeks. I'll be real interested in Colorado, what its record ends up, because they're going to be 3-0. What its record ends up at the end of the year. I don't mean that to take anything away from what they did. Once they got momentum in this game, they put the foot on the gas and did what they can do, which is get the ball to some of that talent that they acquired in very quick fashion, and it's dangerous. We knew that coming in. Back to Nebraska,
yes,
I really think this defense has the potential to be a top 20 defense right now, this year. I was so impressed with what they did in the first half. The time of possession, I noted this because you were talking about it, and we knew it was super important coming into this game. It didn't become even or basically even until 7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. So Nebraska had that edge. It was doing what it needed to do. Yards per play were about equal up to that point, and then Colorado, ended up with a pretty good edge. If you just look at the box score at the end of the day, you're gonna think, tough day for Nebraska's defense. It wasn't. I really think they did everything that they could. Fact of the matter is, the offense, minus the late touchdown pass to Thomas Fidone, the first touchdown pass of the season, Nebraska scored 2 touchdowns in 2 games, and you're not gonna win a ton. There was a point early on before Colorado kind of started to pull away and use the momentum it had earned, where I was like, this looks like Iowa in terms of, you got maybe a top 20 defense and a bottom 20 offense. If Iowa always seems to end up +2, +3 in turnover margin, Nebraska always seems to end up on the opposite end of that, -2 or -3. So it felt quite a bit like that. They've got to figure out a way to move the ball consistently and score on offense, because I think the defense has shown so much promise that you can win some games that way. And in the Big Ten in particular, I think you can, but you can't come out of your first 2 games with, so they scored 14 today, 10 against Minnesota, 24 points. It's just not enough.
Yeah, and just for reference sake, some of the things that are coming out of the post-game press conference, just if anyone hasn't, by the time you're watching this, hasn't heard them, but Matt Rule did say that Jeff Sims may have a high ankle sprain, but wanted to go back in. Obviously, there's a lot to potentially dive into there, especially as we know Jeff Sims was struggling, depending on what that looked like in the end. I will say he did make a comment, Matt Rule did, where he said, after a game like that, I should basically answer any questions that you ask me. So it will be interesting to hear what comes out of this, especially, I will say, not only today, but when we look at the next press conference leading into the next game week, because at that point coaches will have had time to watch film. So I think that those are actually sometimes more valuable conversations from Matt Rule, because he will have had 48 hours to process it. Because the big thing that, you know, he pointed out was turnovers, needing to get that figured out, wearing down the defense in the second half. So a lot of like what we're talking about right now is what Matt Rule is already kind of aware of, just heading into like post game interviews, is that this isn't none of that is like overly shocking when we're sitting here talking about this. I think what's really hard is this has been a long stretch of not great times for Nebraska football fans. And I say that, I don't say that to like downplay any of this, because I think, you know, a lot of people went into this. You go into any new season with any new coach with a lot of hope, and to be now 0-2, and yeah, you've got some games that you should reasonably win at home, but then Big Ten play is looming. It takes away the wind out of your sails very, very quickly as fans, because it just kind of feels like what you're watching Colorado do feels like, why could Nebraska not do that? I think that's the one big talking point I'm hearing. And it's because, and like the way that Deion Sanders handled the offseason and rebuilding his team was not how Matt Rule was going to do it. Like, he is a very different coach. We've seen the way he does things at Temple and Baylor. Now, with that said, I will point this out, that the college game has changed since the last time Matt Rule coached in college. And I do think to a degree he is seeing that firsthand right now. My question will be through this season, but more importantly, not to look too far ahead, but when we get out of this season and he's looking at the portal and he's looking at what it's going to take into the next year, I will be curious to see how Matt Rule responds at that point, because again, the game has changed since he was last coaching. Just in a few years' time, the game has changed quite a bit. So I will be interested to kind of see how this staff evolves with kind of the experience that they're now getting at. Like, I think everyone knew that this job at Nebraska was going to be difficult for anyone who took it. But it's also going to be difficult to make Nebraska, you know, to bring Nebraska into relevancy in this new era of college football. You might have to play by a different game than you've ever played before. And so some of those things can't be dealt with now, today. But, you know, you're going to have to start, like, I think the expectations of Thomas Fidone have to step up. What can Thomas Fidone do to help make, like, he needs to be the player that Nebraska thought he was going to be coming out of high school. There's areas where they can build up those skill position spots on the offense to help. But otherwise, I just think I'm kind of looking at this as like, this is what you have until you get to the end of the season and you can start looking at building your team maybe differently than you have already, or continue to build on it. But how do you take the pieces that you have today and make them successful enough to give yourself a chance at 6 wins to get yourself bowl eligible and turn this around from where I think people think you're at right now today? And that is what I will be curious. And those are the questions that I don't think Matt Rule can answer today. He's going to have, like the next 2 days of film study, but even more than that, weeks to have to figure out kind of what this looks like heading into Big Ten play.
Yeah, I mean, their answers, they're questions that nobody can answer right now. And in the immediate minutes after that game ended, like, we're all operating a lot on first reactions and mostly emotion. This game was interesting for me because at no point in the offseason, so Matt Rule won 2 games in his first year at Temple and won 1 game, 1-11 in his first year at Baylor. I never really thought that was in the cards for this Nebraska team. I really didn't. Today made me entertain it a little bit of like, oh, well, maybe it, like, worst case scenario, that could be how it goes. And not based on like what I've seen from Nebraska, but based solely on like thinking about what modeling, so Nebraska's over under was set at like 6.5, right there about 6. Like I think the, baseline expectation for Nebraska was 6-6. If you put any trust in the data that's out there, and I put a lot of trust in it. So that getting to 6-6 in very likely did not include starting 0-2. Like I think it was very reasonable to expect them to split from Minnesota and Colorado. Now, Colorado is a little bit unique because we've never seen this before in terms of the amount of roster turnover. And also, like, all of these models are built on an era where you couldn't upgrade a roster instantly. And so, like, we're still in an early stage in figuring that piece out. We might get to the end of the year and just be like, oh, you saw USC a year ago, which did this to like 20% of the degree to which Colorado did. And you've seen Colorado now, like the models have to change. That's real. That could happen. Um, but I've seen some good things. It was kind of a moment of like, oh, but there's, well, I think regardless of what Nebraska's record ends up, and I understand the frustration, and I think you put it well. Like Nebraska fans have been through this a lot. Like it remains hard. At a certain point, you just want to show up, think like, hey, the team's got a decent shot, which they were only 3-point favorites on the road. Like that's basically a coin flip. I just want to see them win one of these. Hasn't happened in quite a while. So I get it, but this is looking like a season where you kind of got to buckle up and take the ride a little bit. And I'm not, I'm never interested in telling people how to feel about things. I'm just kind of trying to express my own thoughts after this game. Like there are encouraging things here. As I mentioned earlier, Nebraska is very limited in some very real and specific ways. It's not excuse making. It's just the reality. Matt Rule says 1% better each day. We can debate whether they've done that to this point, but I really do think it's going to be the measuring stick for 2023 based on what we've seen so far.
It is, because I could sit here and like I'm looking at Nebraska's game, like post game notes just really quickly, and there are things to be like, there are things that went well. And I think that's what's the hard part is like, yeah, you can sit there and be like, Gabe Ervin rushed for 74 yards. That was a career high. And it seems like his trajectory is on the up and up, which is a positive. But what can you really do with that when the offense as a whole is not operating in the way that you want it to? It's not to take away from that. And then I think, looking at what happens if Jeff Sims is not available, I think you have to really take a hard look at what you need to do to prepare Chuba Purdy and Heinrich Haarberg, because, I don't blame Heinrich for getting hit on his blind side when he was trying to, that broke down around him. He did not see what was coming. There's a reason that those people are the highest paid on that side in the NFL for a reason, because they need to protect your quarterback. But I think, if you're Rule and you're Satterfield and you're looking at what you need to do, you've got to start finding like the positives here and building on those key positives as much as you can. But you've got to start figuring out how to build up the confidence around. Nebraska's been in a situation for too long where with its quarterbacks, if you can't play your starter, you have no secondary option. The best teams are not in that situation. So Nebraska's got to figure out a way to get Heinrich and Chuba ready to play if they have to. I think that was the biggest thing. I had even said it, that I thought that they should come in at least to just like settle Jeff Sims down. And then I started to have this moment of realization of like, is there a reason that they're not wanting them to come into the game? Is that what's happening here? Is like, they don't want either of them in, because if you think what's happening right now is rough, like it would be even rougher, but like it can't be like that. So I think, if nothing else, Rule and the offensive side of the ball really need to look at this season as how do we improve on the pieces that we can in the short-term interim? Like how can we improve on these pieces, get more players ready to play quickly? And honestly, it comes a point, and I kind of said this about like the quarterback situation, where if you're not even going to score points anyway, throw somebody in the game that you're not really sure about and just one, get some experience, but what's the worst that's going to happen at that point? Like, I'm not trying to say that as like just throw your hands in the air and be like whatever, but at some point you're going to have to get a little bit, you're going to have to just play a different game than maybe you were thinking you were going to have to play in the beginning. And I say all this knowing that like Rule and Satterfield and his staff know this stuff. This is not like, I'm not saying something that like makes me suddenly, if I was, I would be coaching, college football. Somebody would be employing me. But I think just as an observer, that has to be the conversations that they're having right now, is how do we elevate this team as quickly as we possibly can, while also giving more experience to players, so that if we are in a situation where we need to play them, we can, and we don't have to feel panicked about it. I'm not saying that's what happened, but if like Jeff Sims really does have a high ankle sprain, like amazing to him that he wanted to come back and play. But why does he need to? That's kind of my thing at that point, is like, why does he need to? Because the last thing you want is your starting quarterback to get injured more and then not be able to play through the rest of the season. So those are just the questions that I have, and some of which I don't think Rule would be able to answer today, but might more effectively on Monday after having maybe 48 hours to sit with it.
Yeah. I mean, I said earlier, I thought Nebraska defensively basically threw a no-hitter through the first 25 minutes of game clock in this game, basically to the point of that second fumble. What this game underscored, I think, is Nebraska also needs to throw close to a no-hitter on offense, and the offense has committed 8 turnovers in 2 games. That's where the turnover piece comes in. It was easy to explain and understand in the Minnesota game, because, well, we talked about it on our post game video after that, where it's like you can figure those are worth about an exchange of 5 points. Nebraska lost by 3, and it was -3 in takeaways or turnovers. It was -3 in this game, and the margin was 22. So it was a little bit different, but the turnovers in this game in particular were bad. The interception wasn't good. But, interceptions happen. I kind of came into this game thinking, maybe you can get away with 1. The 2 fumbled snaps, like on a live watch, were not bad snaps. They were just fumbled snaps, and they were killer. And then also, like, special teams, which is where I thought Nebraska really had an edge based on the first game we saw from Colorado and the Huskers, was that good. You had the missed field goal, obviously, but also Brian Buschini, really good punter, did not have his best day, and at altitude where theoretically you can boot the ball pretty far. So the margin for Nebraska is just very, very thin, and that's what this game showed. And for Colorado, which I think is going to get tested in ways pretty soon. It got tested in ways today, really, for the first half. Its margin's a little bit wider because it did go to the portal, and it does have a Deion Sanders, and it does have a coach who is, I would say, unique in his ability to attract kind of edge talent, which he's done, and it showed up today.
Yeah, I think overall, where I'm kind of at with this, I think the margin for error is one thing I said to somebody over Twitter, where I was like, the margin for error is just so small for this team that like it can't be like everything has to be played almost as perfectly as it possibly can. So it's not even like, I've seen a lot of people responding to me on Twitter that it's about turnovers, it's everything. Like, it's honestly like, let's say the turnovers had been slightly better, that would have been helpful, but I don't think it would have answered a whole lot. Like, it wouldn't have answered all problems. It's the fact that Colorado had almost 400 passing yards to Nebraska's 120. So if you're going to reasonably do that, you'd think that, oh, well, that must mean that Nebraska just pounded it on the ground. Well, Colorado had 406 or had, 72 rushing yards, 222 for Nebraska. So that's reasonably a little bit better, but that number is not offsetting enough where it's like Colorado was still dominating through the air to the degree that Nebraska wasn't counteracting it on the ground. So like, this is what I'm saying, is like the numbers are not strong enough on Nebraska's end to counteract the things that were being thrown against it. So I just look at it where it's like, yeah, turnover is bad, but there's a number of penalties, not great either. Now, Colorado had a number of penalties too. This game was fairly heavily penalized and in odd ways too. For anyone who's watching, one thing that I don't think I'll quite understand, well, I guess we got our answer to it, is the sideline warning, because it was the whole sideline issue, because was like the initial one was a part of like offsetting penalties. Because of that, the second one didn't count or acted as the first. I don't know. Regardless, there's a lot in this game that, like, the way that it was being called, I was just like, I don't know what's happening. All of that to say, this was a game that was going to get a little wonky at times, and Nebraska just didn't have the ability to play that wonky, small margin of error game against Colorado. But there are going to be games that will test Colorado, and it will be interesting to watch that team down the stretch. Now there are going to be games that Nebraska can reasonably win and get some confidence under itself and kind of get some wind under its sails. But at that point, we'll just see what kind of happens from there. But it's really going to come down to a game of perfections for Nebraska. It's going to have to be playing as close to perfect as possible to compete with some of these teams in the Big Ten. Because if it allows this kind of turnovers, penalties, time of possession, all of this, if all of that continues to go the wrong way for Nebraska, it's just going to be pretty dang impossible to beat a lot of teams. I saw a lot of people making jokes about Nebraska, Iowa, but I won't go there right
now. Well, as I mentioned earlier, through 2 games, it feels a little bit like between the offense defense dichotomy, it does feel a little bit like Iowa, but with a negative turnover margin instead of a positive one, which isn't going to go well. But this one's tough for a lot of reasons. I'm sure we'll have plenty to say about it, and also look ahead. Like it's just going to hurt for Husker fans for 4, 5, 6 days. But I know they'll show up. The home opener under Matt Rule will be an opportunity to, I mean, it's all you can do at this point, right? It's like, well, let's start a winning streak here, and Nebraska needs to get a win. Like, I'd say the good thing I've seen, particularly defensively, like offense might be so limited in some specific ways that I'm just kind of like, they're doing what they can, but like defensively, like there's a plan. It seems like it's been communicated. They are tackling really, really well, which is always a good sign. Defensively, like I think this thing is taking. So offensively, not there yet. And maybe there are specific reasons why, which we'll learn as we continue to go through the season. But it's going to be a week-to-week thing. And I know people, it may not be what some people want to hear, but you got to kind of saddle up and just embrace it at this point, because it's a true representation, I think, of where this Nebraska football program is at right now for many, many reasons over many, many seasons under different coaches.
Yes. And with that, we'll have plenty more coming at counterread.com. So if you are not yet subscribed to Counterread, please head to www.counterread.com, but make sure to subscribe so that you can get all of our newsletters and updates straight to your inbox. You can also read things online or in the Substack app, whichever is easiest for you. We'll have plenty more to come on this game, plus some other things that'll just make you feel generally better about at least life a little bit. And don't forget, there is volleyball and soccer, and fall ball is about to start for both baseball and softball. So there's going to be plenty to come too that is not just football related. So if you need a bit of a reprieve of just the football, there's plenty coming down the stretch. So with that, we have taken a lot of your time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Again, head to counterread.com, and we'll have plenty more to come in the week ahead. Brandon, thank you. I hope that the severe weather is kind to you and that you can continue to watch whatever is to come from college football.
Losing power on Saturdays is my nightmare. So fingers crossed we'll make it through.
Fingers crossed. We will talk to you all later. Thank you as always. Bye.